The confession hung in the air between us, a delicate, terrifying soap bubble of truth that I was afraid to even breathe on for fear it would pop and be gone forever. Lena's eyes, the same stormy gray as her sister's, but infinitely softer in this moment, were wide with a fear that mirrored my own. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted violently on its axis. My own heart was a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs, and the world had narrowed to this: the scent of rain on her jacket, the faint sound of a siren wailing somewhere in the wet Portland night, and the 3 words she had just whispered: "I want you." The silence that followed was a physical presence, thick and heavy, pressing in on us from all sides. I could hear the frantic thrum of my own pulse in my ears, a dizzying counter-rhythm to the steady drip of water from her coat onto the polished concrete floor. Every detail of the room became hyper-sharp: the vibrant green of the succulent on the windowsill, the faint smudge of charcoal on her thumb from her drawing, the way a single droplet of rain clung to the end of a strand of her dark hair, catching the low kitchen light like a diamond. I had been with Sarah for 2 years. 2 years of comfortable routines, of shared grocery lists, of knowing exactly how she took her coffee. She was a force of nature, my Sarah, all sharp edges and ambitious fire, a woman who carved her path through the world with unwavering certainty. I loved her. I loved the life we were building, the modern duplex we bought together, the way her ambition pushed me to be better. But in that moment, staring at Lena, her polar opposite, the foundation of that life didn't just crack, it dissolved into sand, and I was left standing on a precipice, staring into a terrifying, beautiful abyss. Lena was the quiet to Sarah's noise. Where Sarah was all decisive movement and loud laughter, Lena was stillness and soft smiles. An artist, she observed the world from a slight distance, her emotions playing out in the subtle shift of her lips or the quiet intensity of her gaze. She was the one who noticed when I'd rearranged the bookshelf, who brought me tea when I was stressed, who remembered my favorite flower and would leave a single, perfect sunflower on my desk for no reason at all. For 2 years, she had been a warm, constant presence in my life, my girlfriend's sweet, thoughtful sister, a friend, a safe harbor, or so I desperately tried to convince myself. The attraction hadn't been a lightning strike. It was a slow, deep thaw, a glacier moving imperceptibly until the landscape was irrevocably changed. It started with glances held a second too long across the dinner table, glances that I would quickly break, my cheeks flushing with a heat I didn't understand. Then, a casual touch of her hand as she passed me a bowl of soup that sent a jolt straight to my core, a sensation so startling I almost dropped it. We began to orbit each other, a silent, gravitational pull that existed beneath the surface of our ordinary interactions. When the 3 of us were together, my attention would inevitably drift to her. I found myself cataloging the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, the sound of her quiet laugh, the way her shoulder would press against mine when we sat on the couch watching a movie. A point of contact that burned through layers of fabric and seared itself into my memory. One night, Sarah was away on a business trip. A storm had knocked the power out, and Lena had come over, claiming she was scared of the dark, though I suspected she knew I was. We built a fort of blankets and pillows in the living room, the room illuminated by the soft, dancing glow of a dozen candles. The world was reduced to this small, intimate circle of light, the wind howling outside a distant echo to the quiet intimacy growing between us. We talked for hours, not about anything important, but about everything. Childhood fears, secret dreams, the books that had shaped us. Her voice was a low, soothing melody in the dark, a balm to my perpetually anxious soul. I was lying on my stomach, chin propped on my hands, watching her. The candlelight caressed the planes of her face, softening her features and making her eyes look like liquid silver. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. The touch was so tender, so intimate, it stole my breath. Her eyes were deep pools of shadow and flame in the candlelight, and in their depths, I saw a reflection of my own terrifying, burgeoning desire. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The air between us was thick with everything unspoken, a promise hanging in the silence. That was the night I knew I was in serious, life-altering trouble. The guilt was a physical weight, a cold stone in my stomach every time Sarah called, her voice bright and confident through the phone. I threw myself into our relationship with a frantic energy, trying to outrun the truth, to prove to myself that what I felt for Lena was just a fleeting infatuation, a product of proximity. I planned elaborate dates, bought her expensive gifts, all while feeling like the worst kind of imposter, my smiles feeling brittle and fake. Every time Lena came over, the air in the room would shift. A current of electricity would hum to life, and I'd be hyper-aware of her every movement, my skin prickling with awareness whenever she was near. She never pushed, never made another overt move. She simply existed in my space, her quiet presence a constant, agonizing reminder of what I was trying and failing to suppress. The tension built for weeks, a slow, sweet torture that was equal parts agony and ecstasy. It was in the way our hands would accidentally brush when reaching for the same book, the jolt of the contact reverberating up my arm. It was in the way she'd lean over my shoulder to look at my laptop screen, her scent, jasmine and rain, wrapping around me, making it impossible to concentrate on anything but her proximity. I started dreaming about her. Vivid, technicolor dreams where her hands were on my skin and her lips were on mine. Waking up from them was a special kind of torment, my heart pounding, the phantom feel of her seared into my consciousness, the guilt a cold splash of reality. I was living a double life, one with Sarah in the bright, noisy daylight, and another, secret life with Lena in the quiet, shadowy corners of my mind. The line between sisterly affection and something far more dangerous had not just been blurred, it had been erased, and I was standing on the wrong side, wanting nothing more than to fall. The night of the confession had started with a deceptive normalcy. Sarah was working late, again, preparing for a major client presentation. Lena had come over to help me assemble a new, complicated Swedish bookshelf, a task Sarah had no patience for. We worked in a comfortable silence that was layered with unspoken words, the only sounds the rustle of cardboard and instructions and the soft, definitive click of wooden dowels settling into place. When we were finally finished, we stood back, side by side, to admire our work. The shelf stood straight and tall, a testament to our shared, quiet competence. She was standing so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, a magnetic pull that was becoming impossible to resist. I turned to her, a casual "thank you" on my lips, but the words died in my throat. The look on her face was utterly open, completely vulnerable, stripped of all its usual careful reserve. It was raw, unadulterated need, and it was directed entirely at me. My breath hitched. Time seemed to slow, the room tilting on its axis. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just let me see it, let me drown in the truth of it, her gray eyes holding mine with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. And then, as if the words were being drawn from the deepest, most honest part of her soul, she whispered them. "I want you." Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe to Sapphic Tales so you don't miss the next one. For a long, suspended moment, neither of us moved. The confession hung there, shimmering and fragile in the space between us, a truth so monumental it seemed to warp the very air. I watched the emotions play across her face, fear, hope, a desperate kind of courage that made my heart ache. Then, a single tear escaped the corner of her eye, tracing a slow, glistening path down her cheek. That broke the spell. A sound, something between a sob and a sigh of surrender, escaped my lips. All the fight, all the denial, drained out of me in an instant. I reached for her, my hand coming up to cup her jaw, my thumb gently, reverently, brushing away the tear. It was the first time I had willingly, consciously touched her with anything other than platonic intent. Her skin was impossibly soft, warm and alive under my fingertips. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a second, a full-body tremor running through her. That small, vulnerable response shattered the last of my resistance. I leaned in, my movements slow, deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to stop this before it became a point of no return. She didn't. She met me halfway, her own body swaying into mine. Our first kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a cataclysmic release of weeks, months of pent-up longing. It was desperate and hungry, a floodgate breaking open, unleashing a torrent of emotion I had barely allowed myself to acknowledge. Her hands came up to tangle in my hair, pulling me closer, while mine slid down her back, pressing her body flush against mine until not a sliver of light could pass between us. I could feel the frantic, wild beat of her heart against my own, a frantic drumming that echoed the chaos and the rightness roaring inside me. It was a kiss that tasted of salt tears and undeniable truth, a kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming, an arrival at a destination I hadn't even known I was searching for. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, we simply stood there, foreheads pressed together, our ragged breaths mingling in the small, heated space between us. The world outside, the city, the rain, the life I had meticulously built with Sarah, it all felt a million miles away, a distant, faded dream. There was only this, only her, only the shocking, terrifying, exhilarating truth of us. We didn't speak. Words were inadequate, clumsy things compared to the seismic shift that had just occurred. I took her hand, lacing our fingers together in a perfect fit, and led her silently from the bright, exposed space of the living room, down the dim hallway, to my bedroom. The room was dark, lit only by the sodium orange glow of the city lights filtering through the slats of the blinds, painting long, striped shadows across the floor and the bed. We undressed each other with a reverence that felt sacred, not with frantic haste, but with slow, deliberate touches, our eyes locked in the near darkness. Every button undone, every piece of clothing shed felt like the removal of a barrier, not just to our bodies, but to our souls. Her skin was pale in the dim light, her body softer and more curved than Sarah's athletic frame, a landscape of gentle hills and valleys I was desperate to memorize. When she laid me down on the cool cotton of my sheets, her weight settling over me was the most right, the most grounding thing I had ever felt. Her kisses were everywhere, my lips, my jaw, the sensitive hollow of my throat, the swell of my breasts, each one a brand, a silent promise, a prayer. I arched into her, my fingers digging into the smooth skin of her shoulders, completely lost in a sea of sensation that was equal parts overwhelming pleasure and profound emotional release. This was more than physical. It was emerging, an acknowledgement of a connection that had been growing in the shadows, finally, bravely, being brought into the light. It was a conversation without words, a language of touch and sigh and trembling skin that told a story 2 years in the making. Just a quick pause. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button and stay with us here on Sapphic Tales. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the profound silence, the only sound our breathing slowly returning to normal. Her head was a comforting weight on my chest, my fingers tracing idle, possessive patterns on the smooth, warm skin of her back. The guilt was still there, a faint, nagging whisper at the back of my mind, but it was drowned out, for now, by a feeling of such overwhelming rightness, such deep, abiding peace, that I could barely remember a time before this, before her. She lifted her head, her gray eyes searching mine in the darkness, looking for reassurance, for a reflection of her own tumultuous emotions. She didn't ask me what this meant. She didn't ask about Sarah, about the future, about the devastating consequences that were now inevitable. She just looked at me, and in her gaze, I saw my own future reflected back at me, a future that was terrifying and beautiful and utterly unavoidable. I leaned in and kissed her again, a soft, lingering kiss that held all the words we weren't saying. I choose you. I want this. I'm terrified, but I'm yours. She sighed into the kiss, a sound of pure contentment, and settled back against me, her leg hooking over mine as if to anchor us together. We drifted into a fitful sleep, a tangle of limbs and shared breath, two souls who had crossed a line from which there was no return, finding a fragile, stolen peace in the eye of the coming storm. The dawn brought a cruel, piercing clarity. The first sharp rays of sunlight sliced through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the stark, unvarnished reality of our situation. Lena was still asleep, her body curled into mine, her breathing deep and even. In sleep, she looked younger, peaceful, her features relaxed and utterly trusting. She looked like a dream. I, however, was wide awake, a cold, hard knot of dread tightening in my stomach, making me feel nauseous. Sarah would be home today. The plane of her flight back from Chicago would be touching down in a matter of hours. The smell of Lena's jasmine shampoo was a fragrant ghost on my pillows. The memory of her touch, the feel of her skin, the taste of her lips was seared into my very being. I was a cheater. I had betrayed the woman I loved with the person she trusted most in the world. The weight of that betrayal was a physical pressure on my chest, crushing and inescapable. I must have tensed because Lena stirred. She blinked her eyes open, heavy with sleep, and for a beautiful, fleeting second, she smiled at me, a soft, unguarded smile of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Then her eyes focused, and she saw the turmoil, the panic, the guilt that must have been written plainly on my face. Her smile faded, replaced by a sad, knowing understanding. She didn't say anything, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just reached up and touched my cheek, her thumb stroking my skin in a slow, soothing rhythm. Her silent solidarity, her lack of judgment, made this situation both better and 1,000 times worse. We got up and moved around my apartment like ghosts, dressing in the morning light that felt too harsh, too revealing. The warm, domestic intimacy of the previous night was gone, replaced by a heavy, painful awareness of the clock ticking down. When it was time for her to leave, she stood by the front door, her jacket on, looking at me with those deep, knowing eyes that saw straight through to the heart of me. "I don't regret it," she said, her voice firm and quiet, despite the ocean of sadness I could see swirling in her gaze. "I could never regret you." Then she was gone, the soft click of the door closing behind her sounding as final as a gunshot. I was left alone in the echoing silence of my apartment, the scent of her still clinging to the air, the ghost of her touch on my skin, and the devastating certainty that my life had just been irrevocably broken in two. Don't forget, every week we share new tales. Subscribe to Sapphic Tales so you're always the first to hear them. The hours until Sarah's return were a special kind of torture. I cleaned the apartment with a frenetic, useless energy, scrubbing surfaces, changing the sheets, trying to erase any physical evidence of Lena's presence, as if I could scrub the memory of her from my soul. But it was futile. She was everywhere. In the bookshelf we built together, in the sunflower sitting in a vase on the table, in the very air I breathed. When I heard Sarah's key in the lock, my heart plummeted to my feet. She burst in, full of her usual vibrant energy, dropping her suitcase and pulling me into a hug, her familiar perfume, something bright and citrusy, assaulting my senses. "God, I missed you," she said, kissing me soundly. I kissed her back, my body rigid, my lips numb. I felt like an actor on a stage, reciting lines from a play I no longer believed in. I asked about her trip. I listened to her stories. I smiled and nodded in all the right places, but I was a shell, a hollowed-out version of myself. Every touch from her felt wrong, a violation. That night, lying next to her in our bed, the chasm between us felt vast and uncrossable. She was right there, her body inches from mine, but she had never felt further away. I was lying next to the woman I had built a life with, while my mind, my heart, my entire being, was across the city with her sister. The guilt was a corrosive acid, eating me from the inside out. I knew I couldn't continue the charade. The deception was a poison, and every day I spent pretending was another dose, killing me slowly. I had to end it. But how could I possibly tell her the truth? To look Sarah in her fierce, proud eyes and tell her I had fallen in love with Lena would be an act of unimaginable cruelty. It would shatter her world in a way a simple confession of infidelity never could. It would be a betrayal that struck at the very core of her family, a wound that might never heal. The weight of that decision was a mountain on my shoulders. I started to withdraw, my emotions a chaotic storm of grief for the life I was about to destroy and a desperate, shameful longing for the woman I truly wanted. I became short-tempered, distant. Sarah noticed, of course she did. She attributed it to work stress at first, but as the days turned into a week, her concern began to curdle into frustration. "What is going on with you?" she finally demanded one evening, her voice sharp with hurt and confusion. "You're a million miles away. You barely look at me. Did I do something wrong?" I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for 2 years, and I saw the confusion and pain in her eyes, and I knew I was the cause of it. The truth was a jagged rock in my throat. I had to let her go. I had to set her free from the lie I was living. I just had to find a way to do it without destroying her completely. Through it all, Lena was my silent anchor in the tempest. We didn't see each other during those brutal few weeks. We knew we couldn't. The risk was too great, the pain it would cause too profound. But she would send me a single text every night, just as I was about to succumb to the panic and the grief. It was never a long message, never a demand. Just one word: breathe. It was a lifeline, a tiny, glowing ember in the overwhelming darkness, the thread that kept me from completely unraveling. It reminded me that on the other side of this agony, there was a love that felt like truth, a love that was worth this devastating price. Don't forget, more stories like this are waiting. Subscribe now to Sapphic Tales before we continue. Confronting Sarah was the hardest, most gut-wrenching thing I have ever done. I chose a Saturday morning when the sun was streaming obnoxiously into our beautiful, shared kitchen. I made coffee, my hands trembling so badly I sloshed hot water on the counter. She was scrolling through her phone, humming a tune, completely unaware that her world was about to be demolished. I sat down opposite her, the wooden chair scraping loudly in the silence. "Sarah, we need to talk." She looked up, her expression shifting from casual to wary in an instant. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't. To tell her it was Lena would have been a cruelty beyond comprehension, a nuclear option that would have incinerated her entire family. I simply said I had fallen for someone else. that our relationship had run its course, that I was sorry, so desperately sorry. The devastation that crumpled her face was a physical blow that knocked the air from my own lungs. She was a proud woman, and her initial shock quickly morphed into a scorching, righteous fury. There were tears, loud and anguished. There were accusations that I was a coward, that I was throwing away everything we had built. There was the sound of a coffee mug shattering against the wall, a stark punctuation to the end of our story. The following weeks were a hollow, bureaucratic nightmare. Moving out of our duplex felt like performing an autopsy on my own life. Packing my books, my clothes, the small, sentimental trinkets we had collected together, each item was a fresh cut. Sarah's anger had cooled into a bitter, icy silence, which was somehow worse. The silence was filled with all the things we would never say, all the memories we were now tainting with this painful end. It was during this time that I truly leaned on the memory of Lena's touch, the sound of her voice, the promise of a different future. It was the only thing that made the pain bearable, the only light in the profound darkness of my self-inflicted grief. It was months before Lena and I could be together openly. The guilt and the grief were a shroud we both wore, a heavy garment we had to learn to move in. Our first public date was a quiet, tentative walk in a park on the other side of the city, our hands clasped tightly together, both of us hyper-aware of the world around us, waiting for a judgment that never came, at least not from strangers. Our relationship was built in the quiet, intentional spaces, away from the long, dark shadow of our past. It was different from what I had with Sarah, softer, deeper, more intuitive. It was a connection that didn't require constant noise or activity to validate its existence. We didn't have to fill the silence with words. We could just be. Sitting together in her sun-drenched art studio, me reading a book while she painted for hours, was a form of intimacy I had never known I craved. It was a peace that seeped into my bones, slowly healing the fractures left by the chaos of the previous months. One evening, we were in her studio, surrounded by the familiar, comforting smells of turpentine and fresh canvas. She was working on a large new painting, a tumultuous, beautiful swirl of dark blues and grays, like a stormy sea, with a single, bold, brilliant streak of gold cutting through the center, defiant and hopeful. She stepped back from the canvas, her head tilted, then looked at me, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "It's us," she said simply, her voice soft in the quiet room. The storm we had to walk through, and the light we found in the middle of it. Her words settled over me, a perfect, poignant summary of our journey. I walked over to her, not caring about the paint stains on her hands or her old, worn-out sweatshirt, and I kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion like our first, or of fearful reassurance like our second. It was a kiss of healing, of acceptance, of a future we had consciously, painfully chosen, despite the immense cost. It was a kiss that tasted of forgiveness and hope. If it kept you hooked, subscribe now to Sapphic Tales so you never miss the next. I don't know if the guilt will ever fully leave me. Some scars are too deep to fade completely. They become a part of you, a permanent record of a painful past. I think of Sarah often, hoping with a fierce, desperate hope that she has found happiness, that she has built a new life filled with the love and loyalty she deserved from me. But when I wake up in the morning with Lena's head on the pillow next to mine, her dark hair fanned out, her breathing even and deep, when I see the way she looks at me over her coffee cup, as if I am her entire world, her greatest masterpiece, I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my soul, that the twist I never expected was the one that led me to my truth. The path to her was paved with heartbreak and shadowed by betrayal, a difficult, painful road I would never wish to walk again. But it was the road that brought me home. And in her arms, in the quiet peace we have built together, I have found a love that is worth every single, painful step of the journey.